Hello, folks. It's now 2:17 p.m. on Thursday. This is Empowering Democracy number 19, The Coming Attack on Entitlements. And I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I hope you're having a great day. I know the world is still in an effing mess, and I also know that people are more and more worried about whether there's going to be a nuclear war. I'm not going to talk about that here. I will only say that I am confident that if we enter into negotiations and diplomacy is used, we will not be going into a nuclear war. And that's all I'll say about that at this time. What I want to concentrate on in this stream is the coming attack on entitlements, which I've mentioned before, and also permanent cures for debt ceiling crises. It'll be apparent in just a few minutes what the connection is between these two things. Let us first share a piece from Common Dreams. Headline is House Dem says, quote, every Republican should be asked, unquote, about GOP ploy to cut Social Security. How the Republicans want to get at Social Security. And by the way, here's a picture of Kevin McCarthy, if I can ever line it up, and Steve Scalise, the two leaders of the Republican Party in the House, talking to other Republicans. This is by Jake Johnson, just yesterday, October 19th. The point of this article is that the party leaders of the Republican Party are planning to have a debt ceiling crisis if they win back the House very early in the term, very early in the new session, perhaps in January, to vigorously push for a debt ceiling crisis. The party leaders' stated plan is to hold the U.S. economy hostage in order to force cuts to Social Security and Medicare. The Republican Party is openly promising to topple the entire American economy unless they're allowed to demolish Social Security and Medicare. That's probably a little bit of an overstatement. They're just going to try to get substantial cuts in Social Security, and Medicare, and maybe some concessions with respect to privatizing the two in some way. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who is, of course, in line to become the Speaker if they win, confirmed that the GOP will use a fast approaching debt ceiling fight as leverage to enact spending reductions if Republicans retake control of the chamber in the November elections. So, Kevin McCarthy declined to explicitly say the Republicans would target Social Security, and Medicare, but lots of other Republican leaders have not been so coy and have been threatening to cut the safety net programs. So that attack is going to happen. It's happened before. The first attack on it through use of debt ceiling crisis issues was back in 2011. It's now 11 years later, and they are turning to the same tactic in order to Uh, well, Bill Pascrell says in order to demolish Social Security, okay, and Medicare, uh, probably they don't intend to demolish it right now, but just severely cut into it, cost people benefits. It is not something that any of us would like to see happen. It is something that probably will happen, okay, if the Democrats compromise uh, in order to get the GOP to open up the government. There's a good chance they will compromise because the political power at that point will be in the Republicans' hands, as it was back in 2011 and in 2012, when the Democrats, 2012/2013, when the Democrats that did compromise, and there was a budget freeze for quite a long time, the effect of which was to slow down the recovery that we were having from the crash of 2008. And of course, the fiscal cliff antics that were pursued at that time resulted in a compromise that further slowed down the recovery from the recession. Of course, you know that there was the longest recovery from the recession ever, from any recession post World War II, as a result of tactics by the Democrats and the Republicans to try to contain spending, not do deficits, and work their way back to neutrality in the budget. So, uh, how can the Democrats avoid the compromising? Well, the only way they can both avoid compromising and avoid um, hurting people by having an extended period when part of the government is shut down is to go for one of the permanent cures to debt ceiling crises. So let me stop sharing this and start sharing a second piece, specifically a piece of my own, which, if I recall correctly, I wrote in 2018. It's on my blog. And here it is. You're looking at it right now. My blog, by the way, is at josephmfirestone.com. Very easy to get to. Now, this is a long article, so I will try to cut pieces of it. This was written on January 28th, 2018, when there were conflicts over a debt ceiling crisis. Right then, people were making compromises by suspending the debt limit for some period of time, for a few months, in hopes of finding a negotiated settlement, which they finally did at that time. But since our attention is back on the likely chaos and consequences of a debt ceiling crisis, it's a good time to consider how we might eliminate them entirely. Here's a rundown on the four most important methods one can use to get rid of debt ceiling crises, entirely. One or more of these methods can be used whether or not the Democrats win the congressional elections that are currently coming up. The first is simple. You can repeal the debt limit law. That's a law that was originally passed in 1917 to grant the executive greater spending flexibility while still limiting war spending. That reason for passing it in 1917, however, is now gone. Also, the president is limited in spending to congressional appropriations and repaying debt instrument obligations of the United States. So the only rationale for retaining the debt limit law is to allow one or both political parties to use it as a bargaining chip to get what that party wants, which is most often something that hurts many Americans. How long would it take to repeal the debt limit law? It would probably take an afternoon. No more, no less. So why don't the Republicans, who have control of both houses and the presidency, well, they no longer have control of both houses and the presidency, though they may, starting in January again, have control of both houses and the presidency. Why don't the Republicans just do it and go ahead with the things they want to do? I want to turn around that paragraph and ask that question to the Democrats. Why don't the Democrats, who have control of both houses and the presidency right now, just do it? They hear the Republicans threatening to use debt ceiling crises if they win the Congress. So why don't they just short circuit that by repealing the debt limit law altogether? Now, some people are going to say, well, they don't want to do that because the Republicans are going to make hay in the current campaign. Let the Democrats wait until after November 22nd then. In other words, the results of the election will be determined by then. The votes will be in anyway. There will be no voting after November 22nd. So the Democrats cannot be hurt by what they do after November 22nd. So they can take an afternoon after that time and they can repeal the debt limit law. Have no debt limit law anymore. Not suspend the debt limit for a certain period of time, though they can probably do that too. But the best way would be to repeal the debt limit law. Why would that be the best way? Because if the Republicans come in and immediately try to reinstitute it, as long as the filibuster rule is still there, they won't be able to reinstitute it. There would be too many Democratic senators that would be in a position to block the reinstitution of that law. Why hasn't one party or the other party done that over a long period of time? Because both parties like periodically to cry poverty and to pretend the government is running out of money. Debt ceiling crises give them an opportunity to posture about the deficit and the debt, and then pivot to austerity policies that will please their donors. That's why. Here's the second solution. It's called high value platinum coin seigniorage. According to the U.S. Mint, quote, fiscal year 2016 United States Mint estimated total revenues are $3,839,982,000. Total expenses are $3,982,000. $595,307,000, of which $30,468,000 are for capital investment, and net results are $244,675,000 in earnings. The Mint's earnings, that $244,675,000, is also known as the coin seigniorage, or simply seigniorage. It is the net profit from coining money and selling it to banks and to private individuals. The difference between the cumulative face values of the coins it ships and the expenses it incurs in producing and shipping coins to their buyers, including operating, material, and capital expenses of the Mint during 2016. Both the face values and the seigniorage accumulate in the Mint's public enterprise funds account throughout the year. The Treasury can, quote, sweep, unquote, the public enterprise fund for the seigniorage into its own spending account at will. What I mean by that is the Treasury has the authority to do that. It can simply order that seigniorage be transferred out of the Mint's account and into its own spending account, because the Mint, of course, is the supervisory agency of the Treasury Department. I'm sorry, folks, someone is knocking at the door, so Barney is going to go get it so I can continue this stream.
Hey, Barney, how are you?
Compared to the credits, compared to the credits to its spending account coming from other accounts holding revenue from taxing and selling bonds, the amount of coin seigniorage coming from the Mint is small. But it is there and demonstrates that there is another way the Treasury gets its spending account filled so it can spend congressional appropriations funding its spending. And as it turns out, that way of Treasury filling its spending account can be used to much greater effect than in the past. By using the authority of a 1996 law to mint proof platinum coins with arbitrary face values in the millions of trillions of dollars, Treasury, through the Mint, can cause the Fed to fill the Public Enterprise Fund account with enough reserves to allow it to use the resulting seigniorage to perform its already congressionally mandated spending, and even enough to pay off its existing debt. This idea, which originated with attorney Carlos Mucha, also known as Beowulf in his blogging, this idea in its $1 trillion coin TDC form has gotten a lot of attention during the debt ceiling crises of 2011 and 2012 to 2013. But a variation of it in its high-value platinum coin seigniorage form, requiring a coin with face value of $100 trillion, for example, has received far less attention. The differences in the TDC and HVPCS variations in their political implications are great. The TDC looks like a temporary expedient to get around debt ceiling problems, whose use can be repeated when needed. But it doesn't quickly remove the political problem of, quote, the national debt from consciousness as one of our most serious political problems. On the other hand, if we minted $100 trillion coin, that would change the background of politics by providing for relatively rapid payoff of the debt subject to the limit without balanced budget creating recessions. If such a coin were used, then there would be no more austerity talk and no questions about, quote, how you gonna pay for it, unquote, since one can always answer, quote, well, once Congress funds it, then Treasury can get reserves in its spending account from the Fed through transferring existing reserves in other accounts, including its public enterprise fund account, previously filled with high value platinum coin seniorage, unquote. That is, the Treasury orders the Federal Reserve to increase the balance in its spending account by ordering the Mint to issue platinum coins when it wants to fill it and ship the coins to the Federal Reserve for deposit. The coins then serve as a message, an order from Treasury to fill up the Mint's public enterprise fund account. Once that's done, Treasury can then send an order to the Fed to debit, that is, to mark down, the PEF account for the value of the seniorage, and credit, that is, mark up, the Treasury spending account, okay, in that amount. Quote, I've discussed HVPCS at length in my book. There is a link to my book there, which is called Fixing the Debt Without Breaking America. Isn't that a wonderful title? Austerity, the trillion-dollar coin, and ending debt ceiling, sequester, and budgetary crises. Sorry, I had to scroll up to read the full title of my book. Anyway, I've discussed high-value platinum coin seniorage at length in my book, in many posts at New Economic Perspectives, and on my current blog, which of course you're looking at right now, covering the subject comprehensively. So if you're interested in more detailed information on HVPCS, that is high-value platinum coin seniorage, then these are the places to go. I want to mention, this is the only book on the subject thus far. I originally wrote the book in 2013. I revised it somewhat in 2014. The 2014 version is what's at sale currently, okay, in Amazon. So if you go buy the book, you're going to get the 2014 version. Okay, the third permanent cure for debt ceiling crises is overt congressional financing, otherwise known as OCF. The following clause is needed in every appropriations bill or every continuing resolution bill, okay, or every money bill of any kind that Congress passes. The wording should be, quote, upon passage of this appropriations bill, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account at the New York Federal Reserve with the addition to its reserve balance necessary to spend this appropriation. To say this in a simpler way, Congress would order the Fed to mark up the Treasury spending account with the amount of the appropriation. So if the amount of the appropriations was, let's say, $3 trillion, then when the bill passed, the New York Fed would be ordered to mark up the Treasury spending account by that $3 trillion. And that's not what happens now. I mean, what happens now is that the Treasury has to go out, wait for taxes to come in to spend, or wait for the money from selling debt instruments to come in, okay, in order to spend. It can't just spend the whole appropriation because it doesn't have the amount of the whole appropriation in the Treasury spending account. So these words, these two sentences, I've only read the first one yet, would change the situation because the Treasury would get the money up front. In addition, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account with the additions to the Treasury reserve balances necessary to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including principal and interest, as they fall due for the fiscal year of this appropriation. So to summarize that fancy sentence, it's the Congress that's ordering the Federal Reserve, in this case the New York Fed, to mark up the Treasury spending account with the money that the Treasury is going to need to repay all of the debt and all of the interest on the debt that's going to fall due in the fiscal year of that appropriation. So a simple solution to the Treasury having to go out and find the tax money, or at least the tax credits that the Federal Reserve gives to the Treasury. Okay, and the loan proceeds from the sale of the debt instruments. That would no longer be the case. It would no longer be necessary because the money would be there up front. Of course, certain things would have to change. Specifically, the Federal Reserve would have to cease. The Federal Reserve would have to cease actually crediting the Treasury spending account with an equal amount of money that had come into the Fed, and that would no longer be part of the settlement process. I don't have the time to explain that in detail, what goes on now versus what would go on, but the point is that since the Fed since the Treasury had received the money up front, there would be no reason to further credit the Treasury Department. The first sentence ensures that in the event there is deficit spending in an appropriations bill, reserves will already exist in the Treasury spending account to allow Treasury to perform its mandated spending without further borrowing. So from the point the language that's included in the legislation, further Treasury borrowing to, quote, pay for deficit spending will cease to exist. The second sentence ensures that reserves will already exist in the Treasury spending account to repay principal and interest on outstanding debt instruments as they fall due throughout the fiscal year of the appropriation. So from the point the language is passed, the Treasury debt will be in continuous decline until after 30 years it will be gone entirely. In other words, if nothing else changes, if there's no further debt issued, after 30 years, the Treasury debt would be zero. Let us call incorporation of this language in appropriations and in CR bills overt congressional financing of fiscal policy and associated deficit spending. And what we have now, we can call, in contrast, implicit congressional financing. Overt congressional financing is better than implicit congressional financing in that it is much more transparent and almost immediately will be much more popular with most people than implicit congressional financing and its load of public debt instruments. So I apologize for the background noise, folks. I had no way of controlling that because I did not know when our local service people would arrive this afternoon. As luck would have it, they arrived right in the middle of this stream, but there was nothing I could do about that. So, to go on with the post, my post, within 6 months of passage of the legislation providing for overt congressional financing, its effects will be visible enough for the public to see that the debt is a dead political issue killed by the legislation, which, by the way, the Democrats could pass right now while they still have control of Congress. They'd probably want to wait until after November 22nd because they won't want to create a controversy about what this means, okay, until after the election. But on November 23rd, they could pass overt congressional financing and have it immediately begin to work. But it should be noted that while overt congressional financing requires cooperation of the Congress, platinum coin seigniorage does not. The president and the Treasury Secretary already have the authority to do that. Within 6 months of passage of the legislation providing for OCF, its effects will be visible enough for the public to see that the debt is a debt political issue killed by the legislation, and for the more reflective among them to learn the lesson that the debt was never a bona fide financial issue, but always a political one caused by the failure of people to understand the fiscal power of a monetarily sovereign government to repay its own debt instruments as they fall due. At that point, and even before that, for many people, we will see the end of austerity politics, periodic debt ceiling crises, fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budget crises. OCF directly ends debt ceiling crises because the debt is no longer relevant except as a constantly shrinking obligation that will be paid off as it falls due. As for fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budget crises, their justification is primarily in the false claim the U.S. is running out of money and must slow the growth of the national debt enough to allow the debt to GDP ratio to shrink so that we can't afford to implement, the deficit spending that may be necessary to create full employment, pass Medicare for all, and do other things that a majority of the population supports heavily but does not insist upon in the face of supposed budget problems. There would be no fiscal cliff sequesters or budget crises without the claim that there is a government budget constraint. Once we dispel that with overt congressional financing or with platinum coin seigniorage, these things will be gone with the wind, and a new set of hopefully more fruitful problems will emerge. I look forward to these new problems, the real problems posed by the real, if likely real effects. Posed by the need to win debates with conservatives about the likely real effects of fiscal policy for public purpose, rather than the faux problems, the false problems of imaginary fiscal constraints giving rise to neoliberal austerity. They will be, that is, the debates over the real problems of outcomes. That will be a great step forward for American democracy. There is one final permanent cure for debt ceiling crises. It is making the Fed an agency within the Treasury Department. When Congress created the Federal Reserve in 1913, the progressives who voted for the Federal Reserve and many others believed that the Fed could be staffed by technocrats who would be unbiased and who could be trusted to perform the vital functions of the Fed in a way that was fair and even handed. But over the years, faith in technocrats has vastly eroded, and the legitimacy of the Fed has been undermined, in part because its, quote, independence, unquote, from Wall Street interests is seen by many as a myth. The great crash of 2008 and its aftermath have heightened suspicions about who the Fed actually works for. They have strengthened the conviction that it works for Wall Street alone and never for Main Street. After all, where was the $30 trillion plus worth of credit facilities for mortgage holders on Main Streets that the Fed supplied to Wall Street and the big banks to bail them out? It wasn't anywhere. There was 30 trillion for Wall Street and nothing for Main Street. In addition, the feeling is spreading among the American people that the established institutions are corrupt and that what is lacking is much more bottom-up democracy and much less trust in these institutions and their officials to fix them. So in this time of a coming revolution by progressives, it is time to consider once again whether the U.S. needs an, quote, independent, unquote, central bank run by technocrats and accountable only to Congress, or a central bank under the president, which would be accountable to the people through the president's accountability, as well as accountable through Congress. And raising that question leads to another, even older one. Did the Congress, in creating the Fed, exceed its constitutional authority? Excuse me a second. The Constitution provides for only 3 branches of government and for only one supreme executive for the American people. But there is the Fed with its board of governors and its chairperson, clearly an executive agency of the federal government supposedly serving the people and the public purpose, but, quote, independent, unquote, of the authority of the United States. On the face of it, that arrangement is unconstitutional and should be ended through Congress reorganizing the Fed under the Treasury and nationalizing the regional banks, which as a formal matter right now aren't owned by the government. Anyway, which of these permanent cures should progressive push for at this juncture of history? Repealing the debt limit law seems like the easiest fix from a purely political point of view, and it would end debt ceiling crises. but it would not remove debt terrorism from the political sphere. The debt terrorists would still be using the size of the debt to oppose progressive fiscal policy, and they would probably still be successful at imposing reduction of the deficit as the aim of fiscal policy. Removing the debt limit removes one rationale for government shutdowns, but there is still another available: failure of the two parties to agree on a budget because they both agree on reducing the deficit, but not on the mix of tax cuts and spending. And worst of all, the background of rising debt would continue to fuel the austerity politics that has been most responsible for the decline of democracy in America. The second solution, using high value platinum coin seigniorage, would remove debt ceiling crises and eventually the debt itself from the political table, freeing up available policy space for the advance of progressive fiscal policy. But there is one problem. The president has to order the Secretary of the Treasury to mint a 1 ounce platinum coin with a face value high enough to provide for ending the debt. However, the article says, however, there is little possibility right now that Donald Trump will do this, since his party, after passing its huge tax cuts, plans to cut entitlements, pleading that the government can't afford them due to the size of the national debt, which, of course, it would just have added $1.9 trillion to. In other words, that's what the Republicans were planning. They didn't get it all done. They got the tax cuts done. But they were never made permanent tax cuts. There's a fight over that now coming up. Okay, on the question of the size of the national debt and it's being used as a terrorist thing, not too long ago, Stephanie Kelton wrote a blog on her Substack that basically said, "Oh, it's such a mountain of dollars." She talked about how very much money $30 trillion is. That's what the austerity kings would be focusing on to make you afraid. But that really doesn't matter because that can easily be handled by high value coin seigniorage. The problem here is, would Joe Biden use the coin? He can use the coin to take the debt ceiling crisis off the table. He can even do that after the election. He can even do that after the new session of Congress starts, regardless of whether the Democrats control Congress or whether the Republicans control Congress, or whether control is divided between the two houses, because he alone has the authority to mint these very high value platinum coins. And he'll still be the president in 2023, at least in the first few months of it, whatever the Republicans do. So he can remove the debt ceiling crisis. He can stop it. He can cure it. And so that's really a good possibility for what should be used as the method. The third permanent cure is overt congressional financing. It shares the advantage of ending the debt ceiling crisis and also removing the debt issue from politics with the high value platinum coin seniorage solution. But it too is politically infeasible because the Republican Congress will not, well, of course, that was when the Republican Congress was there. But right now, there is still a Democratic Congress. So the OCF solution is available. And as I explained earlier, there's likely to be a Democratic Senate next time. So the Republicans won't be able to get around the filibuster. And the filibuster then will still be there to block any attempt to get rid of OCF. If OCF is in place for a year or two, it will be institutionalized because nobody would want to go back to the days of the debt ceiling crises, except the Republicans if they could do that fast. But once people see how OCF works, how quickly the debt is paid down with OCF, nobody's going to want to reinstitute OCF. It's going to be institutionalized. So, from that point of view, it's a pretty good solution to use for debt ceiling crises right now. But maybe slightly less safe to use that than to use high value platinum coin seigniorage. Lastly, there's the cure of reorganizing the Fed under the Treasury. That's the best solution from a constitutional point of view to the problems of debt ceiling crises and the existence of the debt, but is also the one that the Republicans are most unlikely to support, and the Democrats are unlikely to support it too, because any current Congress is just used to the Fed. It has some legitimacy for sitting there. So, to reorganize the Fed and place it under the Treasury, you'd need to get a lot of political support for doing that. And I don't think that's going to be easy to do, not in the time period that we have to do it in anyway. So it seems to me the most likely of these particular solutions to be both good and permanent and effective and quick would be for Biden to use his authority and get $100 trillion or more platinum coin actually minted, and into the MIN's Public Enterprise Fund account, and then you sweep the account for the seigniorage, which would be almost the whole of the $100 trillion, and then you just go forward and pay down the debt to nothing. And when many years from now it becomes the case that all the $100 trillion is used, the president, would then be able to order the minting of a $1 quadrillion coin, and then that would cover it for many, many, many more years. So these are the solutions. These are the permanent cures. It would be great if we could get the OCF solution for a few years, but probably the most practical solution right now, from the permanence point of view, is getting high value platinum coin seigniorage done by Joe Biden before he loses control, of everything, and creates a much larger political mess than we have to have. So, I hope you like that. Kay says already, I doubt Biden would do that. Yeah, Kay, so do I. So do I doubt Biden. I doubt Biden to do anything that is good. Congratulations on getting your ballot today. 401ks were a scam to privatize SS. Close to that, I think. So, Steve Vorpren says, hello. Hi, Steve. You're too late. Kay says, I doubt Biden would do that. Biden is not that creative. Laugh out loud. Well, that is true. Anyway, thank you all for coming. One more comment on whether Biden would do that or not. Every once in a while, Biden surprises us, doesn't he? No one thought he was going to forgive any part of the student debt because he just wasn't acting on it for so long. Uh, and there are a number of other unexpected things he did. For example, in the American Rescue Plan, he backed the child tax credits, and that was a very good thing. So he's made some very good appointments also. So sometimes Biden will do good things. The Republicans are going to ram him up against the wall with the debt ceiling, the same way they did his friend, the previous president, Obama. Now, the question is, will Biden want to do something that's better than what his president Obama did? Does he want to exceed Obama in at least some way? He can do it by minting the platinum coin and ending debt ceiling crises forever. That's something Obama had a chance to do, but he was too chicken to do it. He talked about that's going to hurt the bond markets. The bond markets are going to be hurt. He evidently didn't think of the fact that, yeah, it would destroy the bond markets. And who needed the bond markets? Why did the federal government need the bond markets? It's the same thing here. We don't have to worry about destroying the bond markets because we'd never have to issue bonds again. Now, not all the MMTers are for this, of course, because they still talk about the bonds serving as collateral in the economy, and that's a function which is important. So maybe we should keep the debt instruments around. Uh, that's an argument that doesn't really cut any ice with me. We could put through some other solution in order to develop some collateral that could be used other than the current bond markets as they stand now. Because the truth is, the debt terrorism that we get and the fueling of austerity because of the existence of Treasury securities is not worth it. We need the terrorism to end. It will end when people see those bonds getting radically paid down. That's when the debt terrorism is going to end. When they see that in 3 years, half the debt or more is gone, then they will realize that the remaining debt is not something that anybody has to worry about, given the powers of the federal government to create its own money. Okay, folks, I'm done with this particular stream, and thank you again for coming. I'll be back at 5 with another stream. I'll also be back at 9. So thank you very much. Oh, and please do not forget my Patreon account. And do not forget my Buy Me a Coffee account, even though I forgot my Buy Me a Coffee account today myself. It's now streaming across the bottom of your screen, however. So you can easily notice what it is. And you can visit that occasionally, as well. So again, thank you for coming. And I'm going to end the broadcast right now.